All right, we're in our last video for our environment setup, and we're just going to check out our Jupyter Notebook a little bit, do a little bit of exploration as how we can use that tool. It's a really powerful tool. You're going to use it for a lot of things in the DSI, and I use it for testing code and taking notes pretty often. It can be a really handy thing to use. So first, let's talk about just how we can get our Jupyter Notebook open, and that is going to be from the command line, just simply typing Jupyter Notebook. And once you've done that, it's essentially going to turn this terminal into an instance of a local server. And what you all didn't see outside on my other monitor is that it actually opened up this browser window, and I just want to make sure if I can't get that big enough so you can see what's going on. And when I open that, if I go back to my terminal here, when I open this, I did so in my home directory, right? And it takes me to this visual file navigator that is in my home directory. I can see applications, desktop, documents, downloads, Dropbox, right? Plus a whole bunch of other things that I keep in my home directory. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind, right? That wherever you open it, you're only going to be able to move from there and down tree. So if you open your Jupyter Notebook in some, nested file or nested directory, then you're not going to be able to navigate to any Jupyter Notebooks or make any new Jupyter Notebooks that might be upstream or sort of up the file tree from where you're at. But let's go ahead, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to open up and start a new notebook. If you have multiple environments set up, then you would be able to choose from those. You can see I have a few here. I have one that was set up for R. I have one that's a Python 3.6, but we're just going to use the regular Python 3. If you just did the Jupyter installation that we did, the Anaconda installation that we did in our tutorials, it's likely you're only going to have one selection, and it's going to be Python 3. So once you are in your Jupyter Notebook, this might look a little bit familiar. We have a code cell here, and just to break it down a little bit, there are actually two types of cells in Markdown. There is one type of cell, and I'm going to say this is a Markdown cell. Right? In a Markdown cell, what I can do is I can just type regular text. I can put in a header, right? This is a title, right? Things of that nature. I'm going to get rid of this one up here, right? So I can use this type of thing for documentation as I go, right? Maybe I'm going to say, this is my Jupyter tutorial. Right, and we're just going to say a quick tour of a Jupyter Notebook. Right, great. That's what we're working on. The next thing is a code cell. These are going to be pretty familiar. They work much like you're probably used to, right? They actually work identical to the IPython console, right, where I can put in a thing here, right, a little snippet of code. I can hit Control Enter if I want to execute that cell in place, or Shift Enter if I want to execute that cell and move down to the next cell. If there is no next cell, it'll create one, right? And we do have this little number over here on the left. It says input 1. That's my first input. And if I hit Enter, right, it executes it again. Now that's my second input, right? The first input is gone. It's been overwritten by the second input. And I have this new code cell down here. Similarly, in the same way that we could in the IPython console, in between these different cells, we can write different functions or define variables in between cells. And this can be a really powerful tool because it gives us the ability to maybe work on just a little part of our code at a time, right? Where say I want to enter this function, and then maybe I had some other things to do in some other code cells, and then later on it's important to me to be able to go ahead and run that function, right? Go ahead and say we're going to call this a tuple because it's a tuple that's going to be returned, and we're going to use 9 just as we have been. And then let's go ahead and print that tuple for whatever reason, right? So it works a lot like the IPython console, although, we have just another sort of level of persistence, as well as, right, the ability to add these markdown cells, right? I'm going to say below we can save variables, right? And here I'll enter a little below we can save functions, right? Execute that, right? So we can make ourselves little notes, right? I call these cells Markdown cells, right? Markdown is actually a language, a coding language. We have a couple of different options here. We could have code cells, Markdown cells, raw NB convert, that's notebook convert cells, and heading cells. But in general, you're going to stick to code and Markdown. Markdown is a text language. It's pretty straightforward. You can just type straight into it. There are some tips and tricks. For example, right, I can say this is my list, right? I can have a list of bullet points, right? If I was doing an outline, I can actually have a sub point, right? And it will take care of that automatically. That's pretty great. Markdown, if you just go to Markdown, maybe like a Markdown cheat sheet, right? You're going to find something pretty quickly. It's going to tell you a lot of the basics, right? Different headers, how to do bold text, italicized text, block quotes, right? Ordered lists, unordered lists, things of that nature, right? So this is something that you can certainly research on your own. And as you're working your way through these Jupyter Notebooks and the DSI and you're making notes to yourselves, these are things that you're going to pick up slowly over time. The last thing I'll say about the Jupyter Notebook, or I guess two more things to say about the Jupyter Notebook. One other thing that you can do in a Markdown cell, there's a language. It is called LaTeX. It's not really a language. It's really like a typesetting sort of paradigm where you can make documents and things of that nature. But a part of that language is the ability to make these really nice looking math expressions, right? And this is how they make math textbooks and things of that nature. So we can actually do things like that in our Markdown cells inside of a Jupyter Notebook. Again, this is like a whole kind of another language to learn. Specifically, the interpreter that's used for the Jupyter Notebook is called MathJax. But right, I can say x is equal to 5 to the y plus a sub 4, right? Maybe a is a list and it's the fourth item in that list, right? And I can enter, right? And I get this beautiful looking mathematical symbol, right? So as you're in the DSI and you're talking about mathematical concepts and you might want to document a specific formula or a function, it might be worth your time to jot it down on paper until you know the language or know how to type out the LaTeX quickly enough, right? And then go and figure out how you can actually put that into your notebook so you have something to refer to a little bit later on in the game, say after you have actually finished the immersive. So that's one of the things that I was going to talk about. And the other thing that I was going to talk about is that there are a lot of hotkeys available. You've probably seen me like making cells, and I can delete cells, right? I'm not using any menus here. I'm just using my keyboard because this is a tool that I've been using for a while, right? There are a lot of hotkeys. I think you can get to one set of the sort of hotkeys or the command group, it's called, by hitting, if you're on a Mac, it's Command Shift P. If you are on a Linux machine, it's Control Shift P. But it'll bring up this list of commands in command mode. You might be saying, hey, what is command mode, right? And I can see here I have an edit mode. Here I have a command mode. Most of these are relative to command mode. But whenever I see that I'm dealing with blue over here, that means I'm in command mode. I can use my up and down arrows to move in between cells, right? I can delete, copy, cut, paste cells. I can change this from a code cell. I can insert a cell above, for example. I can change this. It used to be a markdown cell. Now it's a code cell, right? I can change it back to a markdown cell and execute it, right? I can execute from either mode, either command mode or edit mode. But whenever it's in blue, you're talking about command mode, and that's when you're sort of navigating through the notebook. The other mode is edit mode, right? And you can see as soon as I scroll down, I use the down button, I got to this code cell here, right, where I have my second input, and I just hit the enter button, and I see that square around my code cell turn from blue to green. That means I am now in edit mode. It also gave me a cursor here. So now if I'm using my up and down arrows, right, it's still going to go from cell to cell, but if I had a multi-line, if I have a multi-line, right, statement, my up and down arrows are not going to go to the next cell right away. It will when I get to the bottom of this cell, but unlike command mode, it's not going to go to the next cell right away. It's going to actually move between the lines. So there's that command mode, there's that edit mode, and how'd I get over here? I was talking about the command group, right? All of these hotkeys, right? We can change the different headings. We can change them to raw. We can restart the kernel. The kernel is the actual Python that's going to interpret the code that you write and execute it. We can duplicate, right? There's all sorts of things. Most of these you're not going to use, but some of them you are. You might want to get to know a few of them to navigate your way through this book. The other thing that you can look at is if you go over to the help menu up here and go to keyboard shortcuts, it's going to give you all of the sort of common keyboard shortcuts, right? And this is going to tell you, right, you're going to use shift enter to run selected cells, command to run a cell and insert a new one below, or command enter technically, Y to change a cell to code, right? M to change a cell to markdown, R to raw. Raw is just raw text, like a .txt file, right? Different, you can change those to different headings, things of that nature. We can extend different cells, select all, right? Undo, redo, enter command mode, leave command mode, select all. There's a bunch of hotkeys, right? And again, these aren't everything that you're going to use, but you'll find that learning a few of these, especially the ones that you're going to need to navigate the notebook, are going to be really helpful. So that's it for this video about the Jupyter Notebook. In the next video, we're going to really briefly talk about Google Colabs, which is a web-based version of a Jupyter Notebook. I'll look forward to seeing you over in that video. Real quick, one thing I forgot to mention. It is important when you're working in a Jupyter Notebook that you actually take the time to save, right? You actually come up and hit the disk, or you can save as. You can also rename and do things like this. Let's say I'm just going to call this delete me, right? And that way I know, oh, there's already one called that. Looks like delete me too, right? That way I'll know to delete this later at some point. Make sure that you always save your code, right? And it'll create a checkpoint for you there. And then the last thing you'll want to do whenever you go to exit your Jupyter Notebook, you want to come over. You can do it from the notebook, right? But if I go back to my File Navigator tab, it'll tell me which notebooks are running, right? And in general, you want to make sure that all of your notebooks have been shut down before you kill your Jupyter Notebook. So you can do it from here, right? You can go down to this close and halt, right? If I do that, it closes the tab for me, right? And now it says there are no terminals running, and I can go over here and I can hit quit. It says, oh, you've shut this down. You can close this tab. I can go back over to my terminal, right? This was acting as a local server, right? It got a bunch of saves, both some auto saves as well as sometimes when I was hitting that disk. But it's gone ahead and brought me back to my command line in my home directory. So that's it for the Jupyter Notebook. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video where we talk about Google Colabs.